There's a moment in every person's life where the floor beneath them seems to vanish. Mine came when I heard Beth laugh, that laugh, echoing through the kitchen as I sat on the couch in the living room. It wasn't her usual chuckle or the polite laugh she used for my bad jokes. It was the kind of laugh I hadn't heard in years, carefree and deep, like someone had flipped a switch and brought her back to life. The laugh wasn't meant for me. I was staring at the TV, pretending to watch some cooking show I'd tuned out hours ago, but my ears were sharp. Beth was talking to him again, the plumber. His name was Rick, but she called him Ricky. I thought nothing of it at first. He'd come over to fix the busted sink in the kitchen a week ago, and she'd told me he was so friendly, so charming. I hadn't even met the guy, I was at work when he fixed the pipes. Beth had insisted on handling it herself, claiming it wasn't a big deal. But now, Ricky wasn't just fixing sinks. He was back, in our kitchen, and they were laughing like old friends, or more. "Mark?" Beth called out, her voice dripping with something almost sweet. "Ricky's going to take a quick look at the downstairs bathroom too. It's been acting up." I glanced over my shoulder. Ricky stood there, a broad smile on his face, wiping his hands on a towel. He had that rugged, down-to-earth charm, the kind that didn't need a suit or tie to impress. His shirt clung to his broad shoulders, a faded logo of some plumbing company barely visible on his chest. "Great," I said flatly. "Thanks, Ricky." He nodded, polite but distant. The kind of look men give each other when they both know there's more happening than meets the eye. As he disappeared down the hall, I turned to Beth. "He's been here a lot lately." "What?" "He's helping out," she said with a shrug, not meeting my gaze. "I can't exactly fix the pipes myself, Mark." Her answer felt rehearsed, too smooth for comfort. I didn't press further, but something inside me began to stir. Something I didn't like. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling as Beth snored softly beside me. Ricky's face kept flashing in my mind. The way Beth had lingered near him while he spoke, the touch of her hand on his arm as she laughed, small gestures that seemed harmless at first glance but carried an undercurrent of something more. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, Beth and I had been married for 8 years. We had our share of ups and downs, sure, but we were solid, or so I thought. Yet, that nagging feeling in my gut wouldn't go away. The next morning, Beth seemed unusually cheerful. She hummed as she made breakfast, dancing around the kitchen in a way I hadn't seen in years. I watched her from the table, coffee in hand, trying to match her mood, but every sip tasted bitter. "Ricky's coming by later," she said casually, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "He needs to check the water heater." "Again?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Didn't he just look at it last week?" Beth frowned, her good mood dimming. "He didn't have the right part." "Why are you so bothered by this?" "He's just a plumber, Mark." "Seems like he's here more than necessary," I muttered, turning back to my coffee. Beth sighed, exasperated. "Don't start this again. You're always looking for a problem where there isn't one." I didn't push further. Arguing wouldn't get me anywhere, and deep down, I still hoped I was overreacting. But my instincts told me otherwise. Later that day, I worked from home, pretending to be engrossed in my laptop as Ricky arrived. I didn't bother greeting him this time, instead, I listened. They kept their voices low, but every so often, I heard Beth laugh that same laugh. I couldn't take it anymore. Setting my laptop aside, I stood and walked quietly to the hallway. The bathroom door was ajar, and through the crack, I saw them. Beth stood close to Ricky, too close, her hand brushing against his as he adjusted something under the sink. "Thanks for coming on such short notice," she said, her voice warm. "Anything for you," he replied, his tone just as soft. That was enough. I cleared my throat loudly, stepping into the doorway. "Everything okay in here?" I asked, my eyes darting between them. Ricky straightened, his face unreadable. All set. Just a quick adjustment, and you're good to go. Beth's smile faltered. Mark, don't sneak up on people like that. Didn't mean to, I said evenly, though my eyes lingered on Ricky. I just wanted to make sure everything's running smoothly. Ricky gathered his tools, his movements suddenly hurried. I'll send the invoice later, he said, not meeting my gaze. Sure, I replied, watching him leave. When the door closed behind him, I turned to Beth. Is there something you're not telling me? She rolled her eyes, crossing her arms. Here we go again. You're being ridiculous, Mark. Am I? I asked, stepping closer. Because from where I'm standing, it doesn't seem like he's just fixing pipes. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. For the first time in years, Beth looked genuinely nervous. Beth didn't respond right away. She just stood there, arms crossed, her lips pressed into a thin line. I could see the wheels turning in her head, calculating her next move. Mark, you're paranoid, she finally said, her voice steady but her eyes darting to the side. Ricky's a professional. That's all this is. Her words hung in the air, but they didn't land the way she wanted them to. Something about her tone, the forced calm, the way she avoided my gaze, made my stomach twist. Then why does he act like more than a professional when he's here? I asked, stepping closer. I see how you look at him, Beth. I'm not blind. You're being ridiculous, she snapped, her cheeks flushing. Just because someone's nice to me doesn't mean I'm sleeping with them. I flinched at her choice of words. I hadn't said anything about sleeping with Ricky. Not yet. You think I'm stupid? I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. You think I don't notice how he looks at you? How you light up when he's around? If there's nothing going on, then why does he keep coming back? Beth threw her hands up in exasperation. Because our house is falling apart, Mark. The sink leaks, the water heater's a mess, the bathroom needs fixing. What do you want me to do, handle it myself? I want you to tell me the truth, I shot back, my voice rising now. She froze, her defiance faltering for just a second before she turned away. There's nothing to tell, she said over her shoulder, walking out of the room. But her retreat only confirmed what I already suspected. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every moment over in my head, every look, every laugh, every lingering touch. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to form a picture I didn't want to see, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning, I decided to test the waters. I'll stay home today, I told Beth as we finished breakfast. She looked up sharply. Why? Don't you have meetings? Nothing that can't be rescheduled, I said casually, sipping my coffee. Her reaction was almost imperceptible, but I caught it, the slight stiffening of her shoulders, the way she busied herself clearing the table to avoid looking at me. Suit yourself, she said, her voice carefully neutral. I spent the day in the home office, but I wasn't working. Around mid-afternoon, I heard the doorbell ring. My heart sank as I peered out the window. Sure enough, there he was, Ricky, tool bag in hand, smiling that easy smile as Beth opened the door. I stayed put, listening. They kept their voices low, and after a while, I couldn't hear them at all. I crept out of the office, moving silently through the house until I reached the kitchen. The sound of hushed laughter floated down from upstairs. My chest tightened. Slowly, I climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. As I reached the landing, I heard Beth's voice, soft and teasing. You're terrible, you know that. Only with you, Ricky replied, his tone equally playful. My grip on the banister tightened as I forced myself to move forward, toward the half-closed door of our bedroom. And that's when I saw it. Through the crack in the door, I saw Beth perched on the edge of the bed, leaning slightly toward Ricky. Her face was animated, a mix of amusement and something softer, something I hadn't seen directed at me in years. Ricky sat close, his elbow resting on his knee, his body angled toward hers like he was drawn to her. It wasn't what I saw that hurt the most. It was the intimacy of it, the easy comfort they shared, the way she touched his arm when she laughed. They didn't seem like strangers or even friends, they looked like lovers caught in a moment they thought no one else would see. I stepped back, my chest tight, my mind racing. Confronting them now wouldn't end well. I needed clarity, proof, something undeniable. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I retreated to the guest room and pulled out my phone. I called my friend, Jake. He was a private investigator, the kind of guy you hope you never need but are grateful for when you do. "Jake," I said, my voice low. "I need your help." "Mark? What's going on?" "It's Beth," I replied, the words bitter on my tongue. "I think she's cheating on me." Jake didn't ask unnecessary questions. "Tell me everything." I explained as concisely as I could, describing Ricky, the lingering glances, the unspoken tension. By the time I finished, Jake was already planning. "I'll look into it. Give me Ricky's details, and I'll start there. Meanwhile, keep your cool. Don't let on that you're suspicious." "Easier said than done," I muttered. "You have to, Mark. If this is what you think it is, you need evidence, real evidence, not just a gut feeling." After hanging up, I spent the rest of the day avoiding Beth. She asked once if I was feeling okay, her tone almost concerned, but I brushed her off with a vague answer. I couldn't face her, not after what I'd seen. Jake called the next day. "Mark, I've got some news," he said, his voice cautious. "You're not wrong about Ricky. Turns out he's got a reputation. Women in the area talk about him like he's some kind of legend. Beth's not the first married woman he spent time with." The confirmation was like a punch to the gut. "What now?" I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I'll get you proof," Jake said firmly. "If he's as bold as you say, it won't take long. Hang tight, and let me handle it." That evening, Beth was uncharacteristically quiet. She didn't mention Ricky, and I didn't ask. But as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, I couldn't help but wonder if she knew, if she could feel the crack forming in the foundation of our life together. When I finally went to bed, Beth was already asleep, or pretending to be. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every moment of the day. And then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Jake. "Mark, I've got a lead. Call me first thing in the morning." Sleep didn't come easily that night. Morning couldn't come fast enough. As the first light crept through the curtains, I slipped out of bed and into the guest room to call Jake. Beth didn't stir, her breath steady and oblivious as I shut the door softly behind me. Jake answered on the second ring. "Mark, I followed Ricky last night. You're not going to like this. Just tell me," I said, bracing myself. He met up with Beth at the Cozy Corner Cafe around 5:30. They stayed there for about an hour, nothing too obvious, just coffee and conversation. But they were close. Too close. She touched his hand more times than I could count, and he leaned in like he owned the place. My stomach churned, but Jake wasn't done. After they left the cafe, they didn't go their separate ways. They drove out to a little motel on Route 7. I got pictures of them going in together. They didn't come out for nearly 3 hours. I felt a cold wave wash over me, followed by a sudden burst of heat. "Did you get pictures of them, together?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "No, nothing inside the room," Jake said, his voice apologetic. "But Mark, they came out looking, well, let's just say it was written all over their faces." My knuckles turned white as I gripped the phone. "Email me everything you have." "Already done," Jake replied. "Mark, I'm sorry, man. I know this isn't easy. Thanks, Jake, I said, my voice hollow. I owe you one. Hanging up, I opened my laptop and checked my email. There they were, time-stamped photos of Beth and Ricky, smiling at each other in the cafe, walking side by side into the motel. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion or a gut feeling. It was real, undeniable, and staring back at me in vivid detail. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. How had it come to this? I thought back to the woman I married, the woman who had promised to love me, honor me, and be faithful. The woman who had once cried tears of joy as we exchanged vows under a canopy of blooming cherry blossoms. What had changed? The answers didn't matter anymore. I knew what I had to do. Beth was still in bed when I walked back into the master bedroom. I watched her for a moment, her face serene in sleep, her chest rising and falling in the rhythm of peaceful dreams. For a fleeting second, I wanted to wake her up and demand an explanation. I wanted her to look me in the eye and admit what she'd done, to beg for forgiveness. But then I remembered the motel. The pictures. The way she'd laughed with Ricky. Instead, I turned away. I spent the rest of the morning packing a bag, my movements mechanical and deliberate. I took only what I needed, clothes, toiletries, and my laptop. Beth didn't wake until I was zipping up the suitcase. "Where are you going?" she asked groggily, sitting up in bed. "Away," I said curtly, avoiding her gaze. "What do you mean, away?" she asked, her voice rising. I turned to face her, my expression cold. "I know, Beth. I know about you and Ricky." Her eyes widened, her mouth opening as if to speak, but no words came out. "Don't bother denying it," I continued. "I have pictures, timestamps, proof. You betrayed me, Beth. You betrayed our marriage." She finally found her voice, but it was shaky. "Mark, it's not what you think." "Stop," I said, cutting her off. "Don't insult me by trying to explain. I know exactly what it is. And I'm done." I walked out of the bedroom, suitcase in hand, leaving her stunned and silent. As I reached the front door, she called out after me. "Mark, wait. Please, let's talk about this." I paused, my hand on the doorknob, but I didn't turn around. "There's nothing left to talk about, Beth. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine." With that, I stepped outside, closing the door on what had once been my home, my marriage, my life. That night, I checked into a motel on the edge of town, the irony of the location not lost on me. As I sat on the bed, staring at the peeling wallpaper, I felt an odd mixture of grief and relief. Grief for what I'd lost, relief for what I'd left behind. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear, I wasn't going back. Beth and Ricky could keep their secrets, their laughs, their stolen moments. I was done being part of their story. Now, it was time to start writing my own. The days that followed felt like a blur. Every moment was consumed by logistics, finding a lawyer, consulting on custody arrangements, and explaining to my mom why the kids would be staying with her longer than expected. I avoided telling her the whole truth. She'd figure it out soon enough, and I wasn't ready for the pity or the "I told you so" that might follow. Beth called incessantly, but I ignored every ring. Each voicemail she left ranged from desperate apologies to defensive tirades. In one message, she cried, "Mark, you're blowing this out of proportion. It was one mistake, a moment of weakness. Please, come home, and we can fix this." But it wasn't a moment. It was a decision. A series of choices that led her to Ricky's arms. I couldn't forgive that. By the end of the week, I had enough evidence to file for divorce. My lawyer, Linda McKinney, was as sharp as they came, a pit bull in court who specialized in infidelity cases. She laid out the strategy, proving Beth's affair would give me leverage, particularly in securing shared custody of the kids. You've got a solid case, Mark, Linda said during our meeting. Mississippi courts don't look kindly on adultery, especially when it's well documented. With the evidence you've provided, we can make this quick and decisive. Quick would be nice, I said grimly. The divorce papers were served the following Monday. That evening, Beth showed up unannounced at the motel where I was staying. I opened the door to find her standing there, mascara streaked down her cheeks, holding a crumpled envelope. "What are you doing here, Beth?" I asked, my voice flat. She held up the envelope, her hand trembling. "I got the papers." I stepped aside, letting her in. She stood in the middle of the room, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. "You really want to do this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You made your choice, Beth," I replied, crossing my arms. "I'm just following through." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "It was a mistake, Mark. I don't even know why I let it happen. Ricky meant nothing to me. It was just. I felt so invisible, so unwanted. And he made me feel seen." Her words hit me like a slap. "Unwanted?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Beth, I loved you. I showed you every day how much I cared, flowers, date nights, compliments. What more did you need?" "I don't know," she cried, her voice breaking. "I don't know why that wasn't enough. But I realize now that I messed everything up. Please, Mark. Don't throw us away. Don't throw me away." I shook my head, the weight of her plea pressing down on me. "Beth, you didn't just betray me. You betrayed us. You broke something that can't be fixed." She reached for my hand, but I pulled away. "Mark, I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, anything. Just tell me what to do." I stared at her, the woman I'd once vowed to love forever, and felt nothing but emptiness. "It's too late, Beth. You made your choice when you walked into that motel with Ricky. Now you have to live with it." Her shoulders sagged as the finality of my words sank in. "What about the kids?" she asked softly. "Do they have to suffer because of my mistake?" I hesitated, my resolve wavering. "The kids will be fine. They'll always have both of us, but not together. I'll make sure of that." Beth nodded, wiping her tears. She turned toward the door, pausing before stepping out. "For what it's worth, Mark, I'm sorry. I'll regret this for the rest of my life." As she walked away, I felt a pang of sadness. Not for her, but for the life we built, now crumbling around us. That night, as I lay in the darkness, I realized I wasn't just mourning the loss of my marriage. I was mourning the man I used to be, the one who believed in forever, in unconditional love, in the sanctity of promises. Beth had broken more than our vows. She'd broken the version of me who thought love was enough. The next morning, I found myself staring at my reflection in the motel bathroom mirror. The man who looked back at me was a stranger, eyes hollow, face drawn, shoulders sagging under the weight of betrayal. How had I let this happen? Had there been signs I'd ignored? Or had Beth's betrayal blindsided me because I refused to believe it was possible? The questions echoed in my mind as I sipped my bitter motel coffee and went through the motions of the day. My focus shifted to what mattered now, my children. They were my anchor, my reason to push through the pain. That afternoon, I picked them up from my mom's house. Natalie, Emma, and little Mark Jr. greeted me with wide smiles and outstretched arms. Their joy was a balm to my wounds, a reminder that despite everything, some pieces of my life were still intact. "Where's Mommy?" Natalie asked as we loaded into the car. "She's busy, sweetheart," I said, forcing a smile. "But you'll see her soon." The kids chattered away as I drove, oblivious to the storm swirling in the background of their young lives. I promised myself that no matter how ugly things got between Beth and me, I wouldn't let it spill over to them. Back at the motel, we made the best of the cramped space. We ordered pizza, played card games, and watched a silly movie. For a few hours, the weight of my world lifted, replaced by the sound of their laughter. After tucking them in, I stepped outside for some air. The night was quiet, save for the hum of distant traffic. I leaned against the railing, staring at the stars and wondering how I'd rebuild the life Beth had dismantled. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from Beth. "Can we talk? Please. For the kids." I sighed, the stars blurring as I blinked back the sting of tears. She always knew how to find the cracks in my armor. But this time, I wasn't sure if I had anything left to give. The kids were still asleep the next morning when I sat down to call Beth. Her message had been short but pointed, for the kids. I owed them at least that much. She picked up on the first ring. "Mark," she began, her voice tentative. "Thank you for calling. I just—" "Beth," I interrupted, keeping my tone measured. "This isn't about us. It's about the kids. What do you want to discuss?" She hesitated, the weight of my words hanging in the silence. "I want to make this as easy for them as possible," she said finally. "They don't deserve to be caught in the middle of our mess." I let out a slow breath. "We're on the same page there. I won't let them see us fighting, Beth. They'll never hear a bad word about you from me. But I need to know you'll do the same." "I will," she said quickly, a note of relief in her voice. "Mark, I know I can't undo what I've done, but I want to do better, for them." Her words were earnest, but they didn't touch me the way they once might have. Whatever remorse she felt now, it couldn't erase the damage she'd done. "We'll work out a schedule for the kids," I said. "Linda will coordinate with your lawyer. Let's keep it simple." Beth agreed, and we spent the next 20 minutes discussing logistics, drop-offs, weekends, holidays. It was clinical, detached, the kind of conversation two people might have if they were strangers forced to cooperate. When we finished, there was a pause, and then Beth spoke again. "Mark," she said softly, do you think you could ever forgive me?" I closed my eyes, the question cutting deeper than I expected. "Forgiveness isn't the issue, Beth. Trust is. And you broke it in a way that can't be fixed." She didn't respond, and I didn't wait for her to. I ended the call and set the phone down, my chest heavy but resolute. Over the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding a life for myself and the kids. I found a small rental house not far from their school, nothing fancy, but it was ours. Slowly, we settled into a new routine. Beth saw the kids regularly, and while our interactions remained polite, they were never warm. The love we'd once shared had been buried under too many lies, too much pain. One evening, as I was tucking Natalie into bed, she looked up at me with those wide, innocent eyes. "Daddy," she said, her voice small, "are you and Mommy ever going to live together again?" I froze, my heart aching for the simplicity of her question. "No, sweetheart," I said gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But that doesn't mean we don't both love you very much. You know that, right?" She nodded, her little hand reaching up to touch my cheek. "I know. I love you too, Daddy." As I turned off the light and closed her door, I realized something important. My marriage may have ended, but my life hadn't. Beth's betrayal had shattered the foundation of what I thought was unbreakable, but from those ruins, I was building something stronger, something just for me and my kids. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. And that plumber? He left something behind, all right. But it wasn't his wrench, it was the strength I never knew I had.